And so you've got a column for the applicant, a column for the street address, the map parcel number, and you have a column for year. What year does that refer to?
That's the year of the construction, the year the structure was built.
Okay. And then you've got the date of the hearing and
The date the decision was made on.
okay, the date of the decision. Thank you. And the next column is whether those applications were approved or denied. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the course of your research, did you find any instance over that period of time where an application to move a structure was denied?
No.
Can you flip to the next page? And what is this page show?
This page is showing the copy of the documents that are filed in the building department of the building structure inventory form.
So, and is it the case that the first, on your spreadsheet, the first property address was 28 Easy Street?
Right.
So this is the source information backing up your spreadsheet. Okay.
On this copy, you can see the picture of the structure. Also, on the right-hand side down below, you can see the significance of the structure. Also, there is a year mentioned when the structure was built on.
Where is that on the first one? You don't have the third page.
Yeah, I'll do this how this is
They
going on.
don't, the date's not on here. The date is actually on that following page.
Yeah, but that's how the spreadsheet was made.
Okay, because what you might want to put in for every one of these
It's the third page.
is that third page, because the third page for our, our in-house sheets, the third page, not this one and how it's constructed, the third page is what gives the date and the historical documentation. So you need one more page on
I
these.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
So you've got quite a few of them in here. You're going to want to put those in.
Yep, got it.
We've got a lot of them in here. Okay, all of them, the ones that don't have it. Some of them do, I've noticed now. But these, the first couple don't.
Okay, so the first one is 28 Easy Street. It's a structure built in 1970 in the historic district of Nantucket. It was approved to be moved and partially demolished on February 23rd, 2012.
In the next one?
The next one is 56 Center Street, known also as the Music School. It was built in 1843, and it was approved to be partially demolished on February 23rd, 2012, and it's also an individually significant structure. Okay. Next one is 77 Washington Street. It's a structure from 1960, and it was approved to be moved and demolished on March 20th, 2012. 26 Westchester Street, built in 1800, was approved to be demolished. And it's a garage from this property on April 24th, 2012. It's also a contributing structure. 22 Westchester Street, it was built in 1976, and it was approved to be moved or demolished on January 15th, 2013. Also, I forgot to mention that on this sheet is listed here. That's the one. 20 Straight Road, it was built in 1968, and it was they were approved a couple of alterations on January 29th, 2013. 38 Washington Street, it was built in 1950, approved move and demolition on January 29, 2013. 50 Union Street, built in 1949, approved and moved off on January 29, 2013. 112 Pleasant Street, built in 1955, approved, move and demolition on January 29, 2013. The next one is 55 North Beach Street, built in 1950, approved, move off on March 28, 2013. 135 Orange Street, built in 1875, approved demolition on April 9, 2013. And it used to be a contributing structure. 6 Delaney Road, built in 1940s, approved, move off on 9/17/2013. 74 Westchester Street, built in 1974, approved, move off on October 10, 2013. 54 Thayer Street, built in 1800s, approved to be moved off on November 19, 2013. 17 Broad Street, built in 1850s, approved, move off on May 22, 2014. And this is the actual picture. 12 Gardner Road, built in 1940s. It was approved the demolition or move off of the main house on March 13, 2014. And it used to be an individually significant structure. 78 Union Street, built in 1930s, approved garage move off on May 20th, 2014, also contributing structure. And in the middle you can see the process of the move off. 5 North Water Street, built in 1850s, approved demolition on June 24th, 2014, also a contributing structure. 49 Westchester Street, built in 1940s, approved demolition on July 22nd, 2014. 57 Washington Street, built in 1750s, approved demolition of cottage on August 12, 2015, also a contributing structure. 11 Union Street,
Hold it, not interrupting.
built in 1802, approved demolition of cottage on October 16, 2014. 72 Washington Street, built in 1945, approved house and garage demolition on November 18, 2014. 36 North Beach Street, built in 1938, approved major renovation. 1 Franklin Street, built in 1972, pre-existing demolished structure was built in 1938. 3 Franklin Street was built in 1938, approved, moved, shed demolition. 5 Franklin Street, built in 1934, approved to build a cottage in 2000. 2 Franklin Street, as it was mentioned before, rented new structures in 2014. 38 North Liberty Street, built in 1929, approved move and demolition of the garage. 45 North Liberty Street, built in 1950, we added the second story. 37 North Liberty Street, built in 1920s, subject to major alterations and contributing structure. 33 North Liberty Street, built in 1948, moved, built a new 2-story structure in 1996. 15 North Liberty Street, built in 1895, moved and finished. If you recall the previous slide, it had just a section in the middle. This is how it looks now. 9 North Liberty Street, North Liberty Street, built in 1938. It was demolished. Michael Key's house was built in 1952. One Brooks Court, built in 1800s. It was altered substantially a couple of times, and it was moved and altered in 2014. Three Brooks Court, built in 1780s. It was renovated, and one of the structures on the side was demolished.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Sue Ellen now to present some evidence that she has discovered with respect to HCC consideration of projects involving streetscape changes. Can you explain what process you went through, please, Sue Ellen?
We studied the immediate neighborhood and the history of the changes of the structures over the course of decades to show how the changes in the streetscape have been made. So this board was presented to the HDC in the past hearings. And what the first picture depicts is, could you just go back for a second? What the first picture depicts is the small space of the structure that we're asking to move displays in the streetscape. The next picture, to Franklin Street, shows a 73 feet change in the streetscape directly across the street. 15 North Liberty Street, again, shows approximately a 38-foot change in streetscape. 5 North Liberty Street had a 43-foot change in the streetscape. 33 North Liberty Street had a 52-foot change in the streetscape. The next slide just shows you where 33 North Liberty Street is located in proximity. It's a direct abutter of the Valmartino property. And here depicts the overlay of the original house on top of the house that changed the streetscape in 1996. And here shows you again just a picture of the original house and the year built in 1938. This is a list of properties, most of which on North Liberty Street, that shows the ebbs and changes of the structures that lived on the street, were moved from the street, were moved around on the street, were altered on the street. So there's a considerable amount of changes that took place to the streetscape. It took place at 36 North Liberty Street, 1 Franklin, 3 Franklin, I think that says 5 Franklin, 2 Franklin, 38 North Liberty, 40 North Liberty, 42 North Liberty, 44 North Liberty, 48 North Liberty, is that 46 North Liberty, 43 North Liberty, 41 North Liberty, 39 North Liberty, thanks, it's the angle here, 37 North Liberty.
Are you reading these?
I'm
to
just
illustrate what?
the location.
When they were built?
I'm reading the location of the house. The next line shows when they were built, and that there's been changes to these properties which reflect a change in the streetscape.
It's on the next slide.
The next slide just is giving you a current streetscape view, which the structure that we'd like to move is not even visible. And it's not visible from the opposite angle as well.
Now, Ms. Delcourt, let me ask you to describe research you have done on the 2 surveys that have been referred to earlier of historic buildings.
Okay. The first slide. So the first slide, if you go forward one, is the Nantucket Architectural and Cultural Resources Survey. This is the survey that's been adopted by HDC, which is what you need to include in your submittal application. which shows the significance of a structure, the age of a structure, and usually a picture of it and its evaluation. On this, I just want to point out the survey that exists on this property is incorrect. You find in the area, it's referred to in the aerial maps that it was present in 1938. As we've discussed prior to these slides, it wasn't present in the 1938 aerial, nor the 57 aerial, nor the 1971 aerial. Also, with the thought that this structure was built in 1938, if you go up, it's given a non-contributing status, even though the assumption on this survey was that it was a much older building.
Just for clarification.
And that's incorrect.
In case anybody wasn't here at the first go-around on this, both sides stipulated to the fact that it was not the 1938 structure.
Correct.
Okay. The next slide shows the assessor's information. What was found on the assessor's information was also incorrect. The year built was 1987. So now,
let me ask you whether you did any research regarding the 2011 survey, which was also referred to earlier.
yes, I did considerable amount of research on the survey because the survey had been brought up a few times and we've been referred to in the past meetings.
Okay, and how did you go about your research and what did you find?
I went in to see Mark Voigt at the administration office and asked him about the survey because it was brought to my attention and I knew nothing about it. And he directed me to Mr. Michael May on the Nantucket Preservation Trust. So, and he said that he would help, he didn't have a whole lot of information on it, and he would be the one to contact in order to help explain the survey and how it came about.
Okay, did you contact Mr. May?
I did. Irina and I believe it was on February 5th, reached out to Mr. May and by phone call in order to try and understand the survey. And basically, in that conversation, I had questions, and my question was who published the survey, where was the survey from, who did the survey, who was responsible for the survey, who shall we contact if the information in the survey, with questions about the information on the survey.
And did Mr. May explain to you the significance of how a structure was determined to be contributing or not?
Yes, he explained that the Preservation Trust had hired a preservation architect to do a broad study on all of the properties in Nantucket. So the 2011 survey includes every piece of property on Nantucket. He then said that based on that, they used two pieces of information to form their opinions for the status, the contributing or non-contributing status of the property. They used information from the assessor's office, and they used information from the Nantucket Architectural, Cultural, and Resources Survey, which is the survey that is at the HDC office. And he also said that they did, and it was based on the opinions of the preservationist that was doing the study. He also said that the property were given a broad category of significance based on the age. Anything from 1975 or older were given a contributing status.
Okay, thank you. And
Okay.
is
So,
there, I'm sorry, was there something else you wanted to add there?
nope, that's
Nope.
it. I was
Okay.
going to go to this next slide.
And would you explain what?
Did they back up right there for our edification? Did they explain why 1975 was chosen instead of 1965, which is 50 years?
No. And I didn't ask the question. So that was just, next slide, Irina. So then, this is the sheet out of the 2011 survey, and again, it's hundreds of pages of every single property on Nantucket. I've listed the sheets here for the North Liberty Street property. So these are my questions and my concerns about the survey.
So this is a redacted
Pardon?
copy. These are only the relevant pages. This is not the whole
Correct.
report. It's just those pages related to
Correct.
this.
So on this survey, where they list the 29 North Liberty Street, and they're calling it the barn, so the ancillary structure, there's no year built. So my question is, if there's no year built, how did they give it a determination of the contributing classification? Then if you go to the 29 North Liberty Street structure, the house, the main house, which is 2 lines up, you see that the year built on the house is 1970. You scroll
Hold on.
over to...
Hold on. Whose phone is ringing?
Mine? Must be mine. Hello.
Hold on.
Yes.
We're going to take a pause. Sorry for the delay.
It's okay, this is taking a while.
Harry? Thank you.
All right, so if you go back up 2 lines from the ancillary structure to the main house, and you follow over to the architect's notes that are provided on the survey, it calls out the house and then the barn, and then it refers to a 1938 date built. It's hard to read. It's probably easier to read on your printed copy. So my point here is that if they base this survey off of an incorrect data off of the Nantucket Architectural Resource Survey and the incorrect information on the assessor's survey, then the data on this survey isn't necessarily correct.
And what is on the next page?
The next page, I think, is just the following sheet, which shows the shop, the built in 1959, contributing, and the antique shop.
Okay. And the next slide, very briefly, you did some research on the condominiums at Tristram's Landing under the 2011 survey, correct?
Yes.
And what did you find?
I found that every structure was contributing.
Every structure was listed as contributing.
Correct.
Okay. And did you also?
Are you talking about the timeshare buildings?
Right up there.
And you have also found comments from building with Nantucket in mind?
Yes. Well, that brought me to when I found that the condos in Tristram's Landing were contributing. I also did a lot of research with Nantucket building in mind, and they specifically called out the Tristram's Landing condos as part and parcel of the reason why the HDC expanded their jurisdiction over the whole island, because those were built without the historic character and quality of this island.
And yet the 2011 survey shows all of those condominium structures as
Abby,
Yes, it does.
you can't talk while they're talking.
shows all of those Tristram Landing structures as being
Contributing.
contributing to the historic character.
Yes, it does.
Okay, well, we'd just like to emphasize for the record, because the board and the commission has been dealing with different information, positions about the significance of the 2011 survey, and particularly with respect to this property. And it's quite clear that the 2011 survey has this 1975 date, and everything built before that is listed as contributing, regardless of its actual architectural characteristics or significance. And now I'm going to ask Mr. Schulich, Jeffrey, to provide information that he has obtained from his engineers with respect to the premises.
As seen, this was material presented at the both the September and the October meeting. I wish I was more aggressive and honed in, to a much greater degree here. This picture right here shows an obvious crack in the foundation, in the slab, the floor. The next page. This picture does a much better job. That's a 2-inch wide, cut that goes from one side of the foundation to the other side of the foundation. And
Running north-south?
North and south, yes. And it's, I would say, between, it's about 2/3 of the way back, in the back of the garage. So hold it right there. I wasn't quick enough to have, and the only excuse I have is that I had too much stuff, stored supplies and so on in here, and we really couldn't get a good feel for it. We emptied the warehouse out and shot laser grades, and from that crack to the left of the lolly column that runs north and south to the very back of the building where that gentleman's holding a tape measure, which is literally only feet off of the rear, off the wetland, the lily pond, is a 6 3/4 inch pitch from that crack to the back. It's the building is sloping towards the wetland. No ifs, ands, buts about it. The tape measure, it's tough to read. I'm going to throw out probably a crazy invite, but I'd invite anyone to come witness what's in play here.
And what else do you have attached with your engineering data?
Well, this picture right here, as crazy as this may seem, with a visual eye, one can follow the slope of the ridge that is going the wrong way. From that corner right there,
Which end is Lily Pond?
the lily
There's
pond
the
is to the
lily
left
pond.
of the cursor right there.
Right there.
And this building, this warehouse, is entirely in the wetland buffer area, the 50-foot buffer area, entirely. And in order to repair this, maybe we should go to the next.
Jeff, just a question. Is that the east elevation?
That's the west elevation. That's the north. That's the elevation from the north.
The north elevation?
North
That's
elevation,
east
correct.
to the left,
Okay.
and west to
All
the
right.
Yeah,
So that's the
looking
north elevation.
looking south.
Right.
Correct.
In reference to this, I have a comment, in reference to this, whether you show a straight line angle from one end to the other, that's the way you tilt the camera to take the picture. I know there's a 2-inch
Yeah.
drop, but it
six.
doesn't make that.
6 3/4 inch
No,
drop.
you didn't say that. Can I just clarify? Sorry, that when they shot the laser from the front of the garage, running the ridge line, there was a 6 3/4 inch drop from front to back of structure. The foundation, John, was cracked 2 inches with a 2-inch drop.
Jeff, could you explain what the engineer letters
Yes.
indicate?
Do we have those in the file?
Yes, they are.
In the previous file? Or
No,
this
they
file?
were submitted with the application.
Okay, that's that big thing.
Yeah. I mean, could we circle back to the crack in the foundation, please? Right, that's good, that's good. In essence, the engineer's report, describes a failing foundation. And not that it can't be repaired, the foundation can be repaired, but in this unique situation, unique circumstance right here, in order to repair this foundation, can we go back to the elevation, please, from the north?
Right. Have him know.
Right there, right there.
Give him the letter in front.
We have a second letter from Blackwell and Associates that basically discusses the likely difficulty, extreme difficulty we would have, almost impossible, to get machinery around the back after jacking this building up and putting a new foundation in. The likelihood of ever getting Conservation Commission approval to fix this problem is extremely
Not likely.
not likely.
Stay right here for a second. This letter references a McKenzie Engineering Consultants.
He was a structural guy on the
There's
concrete.
two
There's two
engineer
letters.
Yeah, I got
Yeah.
this one. Is Mackenzie's letter?
Mackenzie's is in there also. Mackenzie's the structural, Blackwell's the civil.
It's on top of your packets.
Yeah. Yeah. They're all there.
We want to make sure that that's what's referred to in here.
So, just to be clear about this, would you be able to get a building permit to fix that structure, to perform any renovations to the structure?
No.
Because,
I don't see any chance of conservation allowing us to work within, and again, I'll repeat one more time, the entire building is in the buffer area. We would literally need to have machinery employed in the wetland,
In the pond.
in the lily pond, to make those repairs.
thank you. So any other?
Okay, we want to scroll to the last two? No, I'm sorry, back,
You're going back to Collins?
no, back to Collins and 25, 17 and 25, Rod? Okay, right here, yeah, these, I'm sure anyone that's been in town recently, you can't miss what's going on. This is 17 Broad Street. Without carrying on, to any great degree right here, where the current building sits now is where the 1940 garage sat. That is no longer there. Next one. This is 25 Broad Street, as you can see in the very top, built in 1850, and also known as the Nantucket Bookworks, was granted permission to demolish, I believe, in December of 14, and literally knocked down in January of 2015, right under our nose. And my understanding here is that the building, the applicant was in over a period of time looking to make changes, and then it was brought back to the board that all the changes tied into the poor existing condition of the 1850 building, therefore created a change of scope where they went ahead and applied for the demolition of this building, and this very board granted that approval.
one more comment to make, too. I have one last comment to make about, again, the structure presence on the street. And I failed to mention it during the streetscape presentation. No structure has been present in the location of that existing warehouse, garage, ancillary structure between 1891 and 1972.
81 years.
81 years.
Yes. And I'd like to finish this one, Jonathan. Next page. I know, Linda, you asked not to go there, but this is
Where you don't want to go.
Where
The very last page,
where you
I
told
think.
us not to go, but real fast and simple. I mean, unfortunately, none of us were bright enough back. I'm going to put myself at the top of the list here. Weren't bright enough to check the assessors list to see how this building was actually being classified. And it's it's not a barn, it's not a garage, it's a warehouse, and it's also a commercial building. That is attached to the neighboring commercial activities at 31 North Liberty Street. I'm from just a pure common sense standpoint. We're looking to remove, on top of everything else, a commercial use in a residential neighborhood. Period. Thank you.
So we would just say in conclusion that the research that has been conducted since the last hearing has shown, at least in the last several years, and which required a lot of time to go back 3 years, the commission has a record of consistently allowing structures to be moved, if not demolished. And we've shown you the types of structures that have been involved in the past, many of them over 100 years old, and there's only one instance we could find of a structure that was younger than this one, which the commission approved. And given the information that you now have on the historic surveys, the 2011 survey should have no weight whatsoever in your determining whether or not this structure contributes to the historic character of the town. The classification you use is that it's non-contributing, which is, of course, appropriate based on what you've seen in the slide of the building. Not that it's not a good-looking building, but it's not. It does not have historic significance. And finally, the owner is in a position with this building where the foundation has cracked, it is sinking, and we're not maintaining that it's about to fall into the wetlands, but the fact is that if one wanted to improve that building, put up sheetrock, make some use of it, you would not be able to get a building permit because you wouldn't get by the Conservation Commission. And they'd never allow that structure to be altered without, the building department would not permit that structure to be changed without fixing the foundation. So based on all of this material, we very respectfully submit that it would be arbitrary of the commission to not permit the relocation of this structure. And would ask that, based on this new evidence, that you do vote permitting its relocation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
No,
Okay.
no, just, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. That was long.
Well, less than 4 hours, which is what I thought it was going to be. Okay. Steve, you're here for who?
For myself.
You'll be speaking for yourself?
I will be.
Sarah, do you want to go first?
I think Mr. May have a time constraint, so
Okay.
I'd like to give him the floor.
Michael, come on up so that the thing can hear you. You can roll a chair up if you want. John, he needs to put a chair right there. Can that move?
I can move back.
No.
He just needs
Okay,
a chair.
you can, but he just needs a chair right there.
Great.
Thank you.
Going on up.
Shall I state my name? Michael May,
Yep.
Nantucket Preservation Trust. For the record, I just wanted, there are a couple things I wanted to mention. I think that the 2011 survey, it's still being misrepresented, and I'll try to explain it again, what it is. And I know it's a difficult sometimes to understand, but there are different reasons why Nantucket is a National Historic Landmark. And one of them is because of the whaling industry, buildings, the history associated with that. Another is the seaside resort industry that began in the 1840s really, and went into the 20th century. And another third area of major significance, according to the federal government, is our role in preservation. I mean, we're one of the leaders in the country in preservation. So when we came up with the date of 1975, actually the federal government came up with this, we looked at the founding of our local ordinance, which is in 1955, and thought that might be a good date. We also looked at Walter Beinecke's contribution to the historic district and to Nantucket, into preservation. And the National Park Service decided that that was the more appropriate date, and they thought 1975 was a better date than picking 50 years, just 50 years. Every survey that's done has a time frame. Every single survey. So when you look at something that was done in the 1980s, 25 or 30 years later, of course those the building dates are going to change that are considered contributing to a district. So since our survey done in the 1980s is 25 years old or more, some of the buildings that were built in the 1940s may not have been considered contributing at that time, but this time they would be, just based on age alone. So when we looked at every single parcel on island, over 13,000 parcels, they looked at the date, if it was contributing by date. But when a local historic district commission looks at a document like that, it's really a red flag. It just says, how does this building that's contributing to the historic district in terms of date, is it contributing to the district in reality when you look at other factors? So it really is just a guide, just like building with Nantucket is a guide. And I think that sometimes that's unclear to people. So it doesn't mean that every single building built in 1975 or even 1960 or 1920 is contributing. There are other factors that make a building contributing, and you all look at that.
We do that.
You do that.
We have
That's
to
what you
do
do that. And so something like Tristan's Landing, I know it seems ridiculous, but by date, it falls into that period of 1975 that maybe it's contributing in some way. So I just wanted to clarify that, because there's a lot of, I mean, I don't think it is, but maybe 100 years from now, if it's the only thing standing on the island, it will be.
Hopefully it will fall in by then.
So, I mean, things change over time. The contributing things change over time. And I think there's a real confusion about that. But one thing that you do look at when you're looking at a building, no matter what its date, its setting, is it contributing to the historic character of the other historic resources around it? And what is the relationship of that building in the history and to those historic structures? So that's what's critical. And I think, I understand that this is a complicated situation, but the last decision 3-2, shows that it was a complicated decision. And, I kind of fall on the other end. I really think that it is contributing to the district in its scale and its use of materials, how it fits into, how it complements the Seth Ray building, which is really, I think everybody realizes is very historic and should be preserved. So there are judgment calls in here, but at the same time, I think you can argue it, that it is very significant to the district, and especially since it's not in Tom Nevers or Tristan's Landing. It's in an area where there are historic buildings. The other thing I just noticed in the presentation itself, I might also add that I also sent you the link to the whole report. So you have the whole report. It has who did the report, who worked on it.
Michael, apparently it does not. I
It
looked
does.
at it quickly and I couldn't find it. So
It's in there, and I'm sorry if you couldn't find it. It is in there. It's on. I'll get the page number for you and send it. But I couldn't remember the contact's last name, the person who had it. It's Boston Associates was the group that did it.
Boston Associates.
So Boston Associates. They've done things like Beacon Hill.
Yeah.
All the major updates of the National Historic Landmark status they've done in Massachusetts. All that information is there, and it's a huge document. So sometimes it's hard to find because it's not necessarily on the first or second page. It's the federal government, so you have to look through it. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I do know that there are various opinions, and I think that age is really important. But age alone is not something that you should consider. There are other things that should be considered, and those are how it fits in the streetscape. And I started thinking about this, and I was trying to, I'm a visual person, so I need to show people sometimes examples. And there are some wonderful landmarks in Nantucket. I think this is such one of the iconic views in Nantucket. It's a picture of Front Street. Wisconsin. I can happen to live nearby, so I always see this
a million pictures
every day. It's one of those iconic pictures, and you see it, and people paint it, students paint it, that sort of thing. But if you really look at that building and analyze that building, those two buildings in front, they're both 20th century. They're iconic Nantucket landmarks, and I would really argue that they are critical to our historic district. And I think anybody would really believe that if they look at it. One of them was built in 1990, and the other one was probably built in about 1940. So they wouldn't have been in the 1980s survey as contributing. I don't believe I haven't looked up the one. But we think it was built about 1940. And then the other one is definitely 1990. And I would argue if somebody wanted to come in to remove them and build something in their place, I think people in Wisconsin and the whole community would be pretty upset about that. The other thing that we did in the National Historic Landmark thing was look at things like Old South Wharf, that whole Beinecke redevelopment. And I think that's another example of something done in mid-century, 20th century, that people would be very upset if they were changed. And I'll just pass that around too. I mean, buildings built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Are those stamped in?
Old South Wharf.
One is. No, two are.
But literally, I just found out that the meeting was happening yesterday, and I had about 10 minutes this morning, and they're the ones that I came up with. There are probably other examples. I did want to point out just some of the research that was done by the applicant. I noticed that there's some little inconsistencies in terms of dates. The building at 56 Center Street had a major fire, for example, so that's why that was significantly altered and changed. The other one that I thought was interesting was 38 Union Street. I think you had the wrong date. 17? Or maybe.
78.
Yeah. But there are other ones, the 28 Easy Street doesn't fit into the streetscape anymore. So they weren't within the context of the historic streetscape, and we don't know all the reasons why they were changed. I mean, they're always hard decisions. So I just think that you have to keep that in mind. But anyway, those are the major points I wanted to say, but I'd be happy to talk about the National Historic Landmark in more detail and what it
I don't think
really
anybody
means.
wants to hear any more about that.
I know.
Right.
Just a few relating to that. So hopefully everyone in the room agrees that the Tristram's Landing stuff, at least by current standards, are not really historically significant.
Right.
And I don't think anyone would weep if they fell over in a storm or whatever.
Right.
So they're on that survey, as is the building under discussion right now.
And several others that aren't correct.
Right. I mean, so rather than parse that, so I think it's fair to say that some of the buildings in that survey really are worthy of scrutiny. Others aren't, or they're worthy of discussion, but ultimately they're not really contributing in the way that you and I would define the term.
Right. They fall under that period that the National Park Service decided was important for the island. So it's kind of like, it really is just a red flag saying more details needed. And usually what you do is a survey B. If you were going to do something major about that building in terms of a tax act project, or you're putting it under preservation easement, the state would require you to do a more detailed survey. So you do a detailed history, a detailed architectural, all that. So that's for those historic buildings.
Right.
But then there are also buildings within the historic district that work or sensitively would be considered contributing because they're sensitive. And they take into those account, like the Beinecke buildings on South Wharf. They're the most visible examples from that period, of that 1975 period. But there are other ones, and I would argue that this one is one because it fits in with the historic district.
But now also the photographs of the other sort of what I think we all would call iconic buildings, the photograph from Front Street. It's interesting that one of those buildings dates from 1990. Now, the interesting sort of conundrum here is it's built in 1990 and it's successful, and it's successful to the streetscape. That means, for me, that's saying two things. Does that mean that because somebody happened to do a really great building, that all of a sudden we can't, it's done, we can't change it anymore? There's no future for that other than to leave that right where it is? That's number one. And number two, who's the arbiter of that?
Right.
Who decides that? What's iconic? What's, a word that we've been using on this board very frequently is funky. Now, funky is like, basically describes Codfish Park, where the buildings in Codfish Park defy, for the most part, every regulation that we try to adhere to, but at the same time, it all holds together. Mm-hmm. Again, it gets down to this, who decides that? And I think, as somebody mentioned in one of the earlier meetings, I believe it was the guy that built the building, he said, if I had only known when I was building this little gambrel what I was getting myself into, because, hey, guess what? Everybody kind of likes it. It's a nice building. So, thank you. I just wanted to clarify for those things.
There's another example that I think is very interesting, and that's the Philip Johnson house that was demolished here.
Yeah, exactly.
Because,
Right.
I mean,
Address.
Paul's Harbor.
Yeah, that was the old pink building.
Pink House, the
The
Flamingo
The
House.
pink house.
I mean, people thought it was awful, but when we realized it was Philip Johnson and it was demolished, what a shame, because it showed its progression towards the glass house. And that's the kind of thing that I think you are the arbitrators. You're the ones who have to decide. I mean, that's your role. I mean, there's been discussion, are you a preservation group or an architectural review board? And I say both. And I think that's the role of the HDC, to protect the historic district's historic resources and also make sure that new ones fit in. And when new ones fit in, they might become the next landmarks. And I would argue that those two on Front Street are the next landmarks of the future. So you should treat them special. They're red flags, they call it.
Town council doesn't agree with that at all. Anybody else? I have a question, Michael.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions before I ask a question? You mentioned a couple of times Beinecke's improvements, and that they sort of picked 1975 because of Beinecke's improvements.
Right.
When in fact, Beinecke's improvements were early to mid-'60s.
They were.
Not 1975.
But he did other things.
Because then we are here
He
when
did
he
the
did it.
historical trust. He established that.
Right.
And the PIN program,
Right.
Preservation Institute, and that was
So they're
1975.
basically not going back to the wharf project.
They're going back to his
the
whole,
organizational project.
his influence on Island in historic preservation. That's what was important. That's why Nantucket that's the new reason Nantucket's historic is of national importance.
Because I remember what the wharves used to look like, because we crawled around down
Right.
there as kids in those artist shacks.
Right. I mean, things evolve. So, but I mean, that's 25 years ago we wouldn't have done that, but today it's important.
All right, so I just wanted to
Thank
clear
you.
that up. Okay, Steve?
Sure.
Cohen? You have to
Sure.
come,
Madam-
get
Madam-
close to sit and come, because this isn't going to pick up much.
So I just want to disclose for the record, I'm an attorney, and I do represent Mr. Kashulik, but I'm making these in another matter, but I'm making these comments personally. I think actually the conversation that was just had is sort of the crux of this whole thing, and didn't necessarily get 100% to the point, but got really, really close. And what I mean by that is that the HDC is only allowed to demolish buildings, not only allowed to prevent the demolition of buildings under the standard in the statute. And the standard in the statute is whether a building is architecturally or significantly significant. And this building is neither. And I, as someone who does a lot of work with clients before the HDC, am extremely concerned that we are now taking other considerations and saying you can't demolish a building because those considerations are not valid under the statute. So,
By demo, I assume you mean demo or move.
demo or move, yeah. The HDC generally considers moving a building off from its current location under that same standard. If you have a building, it doesn't actually, I agree that it somewhat doesn't matter if it's an old building. It can be an important building, it can be architecturally significant or historically important without being old. The 50-year mark is irrelevant. If you look at the modern buildings in Nantucket, not the contemporary ones, but the modern architecture in Nantucket, if you look at Codfish Park, if you look at Old North Wharf or Old South Wharf, there are more modern buildings that are not historically important, but are architecturally important. And to some extent, the Philip Johnson House, which was remarkably unpopular, but he's certainly an architect that should be given a great deal of respect. It doesn't matter whether people like them if they're architecturally important or historically important. I mean, Greater Light is one of our most important buildings, and it couldn't be less. It doesn't make any sense, but it's beautiful and it's historically important. And I think what we have here is a building that has no significant history and no architectural significance. But there's actually two prongs to that test. Is there architectural or historic significance? And then also, is there a detriment to the public interest in it being demolished or moved? And no one has suggested any of those things. The only arguments that we've heard here are A, I don't like the development that might happen here, which of course is A, not a factor, and B, something 100% within your control to determine. And B, people have said, well, this building fits in really well with the streetscape and it's really important. And of course, that essentially gets to Ray's question, which is does a building become non-movable and non-demolishable just because they did a really good job? And that's what we have here, is a building that's nice, a building that works well. But theoretically, every building approved by you should meet that standard. I don't know that that's
We only wish.
but it's true. every building approved by the HDC is supposed to fit well in its surroundings. It's supposed to meet the guidelines.
We try.
I know you do. We
try.
spend hours and hours and hours and thousands of dollars making that happen. And we get really close on most of them. And on some of them, we really hit the mark. And this one really hit the mark. But I don't think that anyone can argue that it's historically significant. I don't think anyone can argue that it's architecturally significant. And I don't think anyone can argue that there is a detriment to the public interest by its being removed. You can only argue that you don't want any change and that it looks nice the way it is. But legally, it has no standing to be prevented from being demolished. And if this board makes that determination, then I would ask you, what can you then not prevent the demolition of moving or from? This is a step too far. And I would ask you to keep in mind that the popular opinion or the public opinion is irrelevant to your decisions, and that you should make them based on the law and your jurisdiction and the actual facts at hand. And what we have here is a building that is not worthy of being protected, regardless of how aesthetically pleasing it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sir, are you ready?
Oh, okay, first of all, I wanted to,
Do you have stuff to hand out?
I just have this I want to put in the record. It's a copy of the entire previous record, just in case.
Oh, we
things-
incorporated the record.
Well, I'm not always confident that that occurs the way it should, so,
So this is the whole file and nothing but the file?
yes.
And this, what are we calling that file, the original?
Well, yeah, because it had, that file also has the previous file that was withdrawn.
We did not incorporate that file in this,
No.
unless, we actually
You
incorporated that
incorporated it
file into the previous.
Into the previous
Into the
one,
next
so
one.
by incorporating the previous one,
We
you've
just got it
incorporated
both.
both. That's true.
Okay.
Okay. So, Sarah Alger, for the record, I represent the Montgomerys, the Hoyts, and the Bermans. I think you made the right decision the first time. I think you had every right to make the decision that you made. You carefully reviewed the record. Now you're having an opportunity to do it again. But I haven't seen anything that would cause me to think that you should make a decision different than the one that you made. I'm sorry that the Board of Selectmen chose not to support your decision and instead kind of sidestepped the issue by remanding, by giving you a remand decision that really provided no clear instructions as to what you were to do. That discussion was extremely disappointing. But as I think Mr. May's presentation was really spot on, and there's very little I could do to better that, because he speaks so well to the context of streetscape and the importance of that structures melding into the streetscape make. The HDC is the arbiter of what's important and what isn't when it comes to historic structures and architectural importance, particularly in the core. I think Mr. Cohen was completely wrong. I think we can argue that this building is both historically and architecturally significant, and that its removal would be a detriment to the public interest. This structure mirrors the architecture of its surroundings. It's a complement to the 1795 Seth Ray House. It's next to the old Seth Ray shop, the 1802 structure. It's been there since somewhere between 1972 and 1975. A lot of time has been spent talking about this 1938 thing. I think we've all agreed that this building was not there until sometime between 1972 and 1975. The streetscape in this particular area with these two old 1795 and 1802 structures is extremely important. It's what visitors see when they take a walk from, say, the oldest house down North Liberty Street on their way to or from the monument. These houses, the houses have been there in their location. This structure has been there since 1972, 75, and it has, as a result, developed importance. You've always been very clear that each case is its own separate, unique situation, and that your decision to allow or not allow something in a prior case is not precedent and isn't binding upon you in your next decision, that each case is unique. Now, I didn't have a copy of that PowerPoint presentation in advance, so I haven't had an opportunity to go through it to refute each and every one of those. But one of the things that I can tell you is that in almost all of those circumstances, you had before you what was proposed in the place of the structure that was being either demolished or relocated or altered. You weren't giving just a carte blanche to development. You saw, and you have a right to request to see, when you're making these sorts of decisions, what is going in its place. That isn't the case here, and it was, I believe, the case in many of those examples that were put up on the screen. There were also some errors in what was put up on the screen. For example, Gardner Road, 12 Gardner Road, a case that Mr. Paul and I know all too well, is well outside the core. It's off the Pulcus Road. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. 20 Straight Wharf, the old Captain Toby's. It had alterations, but nothing that destroyed or altered the streetscape. You were very careful about that.
Just a point. It did come up and they did do stuff to it, but that whole second floor is balloon framed over the first floor, and that whole second floor was added in that 70s, 80s, somewhere in there. That whole second floor, back in the 60s, that whole second floor was added. It was a one-floor building. So that whole second floor gambrel was added after the fact. So the recent one...
Added in the 60s and 70s, which I would argue becomes part of the contributing structure. I mean, you cannot separate the history of these structures and freeze them in time. And no one has suggested that nothing could happen to this barn. We haven't seen a proposal to repurpose or reuse this barn. That's never been before you. We've had a lot of representations about what the Conservation Commission would or wouldn't do, but they haven't been before the Conservation Commission. We don't know that the Conservation Commission wouldn't allow this building to be picked up, put on a better foundation, repaired, converted to a dwelling, continued to be used as a barn. We just have absolutely no idea, because no application has gone before the Conservation Commission. There is, of course, a natural conflict between the 2011 and the 1989 survey. There's a 22-year difference between those two surveys. Of course, buildings that people looked at in 1989 may have developed a significance, have become independently or individually contributing or significant in that time period. There's also the fact that historic preservation evolves, people's thoughts about what's important for the island evolves. So I don't think you can completely discredit the 2011 survey just because it's different from the 1989 survey. I guess what I would end by saying is that you looked at this before, you made a decision, you saw that it was contributing to its time and place, to the historic streetscape of this portion of North Liberty Street. Mistakes that have been made, other decisions that may have or may not have altered the streetscape, all those things make this even more important. And so I would ask that you take that into account and that you reaffirm your decision. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Anybody have any questions for Sarah?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Anybody in the public have anything new to add?
Tom Montgomery, 33 North Liberty Street.
You have stuff to hand out?
Yeah, I do. There's one for the file and one for all the commissioners.
You have one for the,
I don't. But he said, let them use that one, and then there'll be enough, and you can stuff that in. You can, I guess everybody's on this side of the page? Okay.
I need, how many do we have over there?
We have a lot. Have 5 there plus one for you.
And you're good, Linda?
Yep.
Okay?
And the next one?
Just my own. It is a dangerous and misleading part of the process when we let unsubstantiated snapshots attempt to build a case study for comparison. If you look at your packet, and under photograph number 1, it shows 26 West Chester Street. This is really the house at the end of Blackberry Lane. It says it was built in 1900. And I would ask you to look on the second page of your packet, and what you will see is this photograph. This is taken out of Nantucket's North Shore, A Neighborhood History by Francis Ruley Cartoonan, the historian. And so on page...
Hold on.
Yep. You got it?
Are all of these from the same, no,
Yeah.
these two are from the same book?
Yes.
That's not cited on here.
Okay, sorry.
So give it to me again.
So it's from Nantucket's North Shore.
Hold on. Nantucket's. You have the site where these are coming from.
Yeah,
North Shore?
Nantucket's North Shore.
I can't read it anymore. Who's it by?
Well, it's called A Neighborhood History by Francis Ruley Cartoonan, Carttunen.
C-A-R.
K-A-R.
That's what I thought. K-A-R.
Ttunen.
I actually knew that. Okay.
And
these
so,
pages
if you look at that, you will see I've shown you that it's this photograph was taken from the tower of the Old North Church in 1870, and it shows that it's the only house on Blackberry Lane. If you look at your next page in your pamphlet, you will see this page, and what it shows is a picture in the upper left-hand corner of the sole house on Blackberry Lane, and also in the last paragraph, it says there is only one house on Blackberry Lane, built in 1930s.
1830s.
Sorry, thank you, 1830s.
Where is Blackberry Lane?
Blackberry Lane is across the street from what used to be the old hospital.
Oh,
It goes Wesco Place,
Wesco Place.
Blackberry Lane, and then we talked about a couple of the
We
houses.
just did a whole bunch of renovation to this house, just so you
You're
know.
not kidding.
Oh,
With the one we did the renovation
Heavy
to, the weird,
So you can't
strange
even
house we
tell
did
it
the
from the
renovation
old
to.
house. Using charts and picture boards can be misleading. For example, using Erna Blair's house at 15 North Liberty Street. We in the neighborhood knew Erna Blair well, and we always called it Erna Blair's house, but it's 15 North Liberty Street. As an example, decades before there was a sensitivity to moving structures, 15 North Liberty Street lost its historic integrity decades before the HDC was created because it had been moved previously. Therefore, using this property as an example, this one, is irrelevant. I would call your attention to the next photograph, which is this one. 33 North Liberty Street. I know this property fairly well because it's my house. I built it. There are a number of things that are wrong with the presentation about my house, not only in this PowerPoint on the screen, but with this picture here. It says it was a 1955 ranch. It was a ranch house, not in keeping with the neighborhood, but it wasn't built in 1955, nor was it built in 1938. It was built in 1963 by Elmore Taylor, a carpenter who lived up the street.
The assessors are wrong, everybody else.
They are wrong. I've been down there today and talked to them about it, and they admitted everything that we had to say. And unfortunately, the records weren't really great in those days, even though it was in the 60s. And this is basically all they've got to show me. I got this from the professionals down there. And that is also on the next page. So you turn to the next page in your pamphlet, and you'll see 78 Union Street, built in 1930. That's it on, it's been jacked up, it's got the I-beams under it, and it's getting ready to move down the street.
For everybody's edification, that's Mello's
That's Tony
Antique
Mello's
Shop
Antique
Garage.
Shop, yeah, right. And that's a good picture of it. And then if you turn to the last page, it says the gateway to the town of Nantucket. Union Street is not North Liberty Street. It is a busy street, a main artery into town with restaurants, the yacht club entrance, attractions, and has a totally different streetscape and character. The last photo in your packet shows the gateway to the town of Nantucket. The use of the word gateway refers to the neighborhood, our neighborhood, use of the word in describing the neighborhood being the gateway to the oldest house. What's important to know is over 600 concerned Nantucket citizens who live here year-round and registered voters sent emails, letters, and signed petitions stating that they were against moving the barn. The point is that presentations can often be filled with errors and misleading information that, in going unchecked, could lead to very inaccurate conclusions. I ask you to vote against allowing the barn to be moved.
Next. Please do not repeat. If you have new information, that's fine.
My name is Barry Berman. I live at 28 North Liberty Street, and I have two pieces to my little presentation.
Do you have stuff to hand us?
I do.
Then do it now.
I do. I do. I hope I have enough copies.
Well, I need two here.
Okay. This actually, part of this is from the applicant's own work. So here's another. If I'm short, I will give you more, but it's in your packet already.
Do you have two?
I
Yeah,
know.
but you're making your own presentation. This has to be dedicated to you. You know that. You're an attorney. Do you have anything else besides these two?
He's not an attorney. Oh, radio guy.
Just these two?
Huh?
Is this all you're doing?
No, I got more.
You got another one for this then?
Yeah, I do. Here, we can pass. I just need a copy for my reference. Here's some more. Here's some more.
That goes that way. I need one. I need two of those, John.
Here's another.
Is this a? I've got that. Is there anything else besides these two things?
That I'm going to give you?
Right.
One thing I just need to correct, and that is that a lot of the attempt to discredit the National Historic Landmark 2011 survey stipulating the barn is contributing is based on a gross misrepresentation by the applicant. So what I will show you is in here, which they like to bring out. And they look at the last page. This is the handwritten notes are from the applicant's own hand. What they tend to try to say is that, it says in this survey that it was built in 1938. If you actually look at the words, it says since 1938. The reason it says since 1938 is that's when they took the aerial photo. And where they didn't see the barn in that photo, they stipulated it as since 1938, not that it was built in 1938. So that in and of itself, as you saw today, is not correct. Wait, that's not the document we're looking at right now.
Oh,
We'll
I'm
get to
sorry.
that.
What document are you
This
looking
one.
at?
Looking at our
The
survey.
incorrect survey,
Okay, thank you.
okay?
Trying to make sure I know where you are.
All right, and we're looking at,
Year built though is
For
still
the record,
doesn't
the
mention it.
incorrect survey was written by the applicant.
By the
It's not-
applicant.
That's not how it appears in the record.
We know that, and we have, there are no notations on our surveys.
that's right.
I just want that to be clear for the record.
Yes.
And when they're talking about saying incorrect data here at the bottom of the page that they highlighted, I believe in yellow, if they didn't, it could have been our highlights, I'm not sure. But what they cited when they said incorrect data right here, because it says photo 1938 as the source, meaning the source of their data that says that since it was built, it was built since 1938. The source is that photo. The source to prove that it was built since it was because when they took the shot, when they took that photograph, it wasn't there. It was
Okay,
built.
what is the point?
The
We
point
know
is
we've
that
all
this is not,
stipulated to that.
the point is this is not incorrect. They were trying to destroy the credibility of the 2011 survey based on this data. On this page here,
Do we all agree that this building was built in
Yes.
1973?
I don't
yes,
wanna
but
waste time on this.
it's the classification of contributing.
Right, and they continued the error onto this thing.
They did not. So
They did.
no, they did not. So what it says under the barn aspect is that there is no date built. Where it says years built, it's blank. It doesn't make any difference what year it was built to be contributing. In fact, the only place, Linda, the only place that it says 1938 is in parentheses here when talking about the Seth Ray House. It says Gambrell, Seth Ray House, barn, Valmentino Antique Shop, and then in parentheses, 1938. It doesn't say built. These are architectural notes. Because they, in our view, they reference the photograph.
Okay,
And
what
in
is
fact,
the point,
the
Barry?
point
We've
is,
got it.
the point is that the survey is not invalid. They spent an awful lot of minutes trying to invalidate the survey, and it was based on
The survey
false
What
says
they
it's
are saying,
non-contributing.
they are
The survey
accurate.
says it is contributing.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
It's not,
The 2011 survey says it's
You're
contributing.
mixing two things.
No,
up.
I'm not.
The 2000, never mind.
Never mind.
Well, never mind.
We've got this, Barry, we understand. Whether you're using the terminology of incorrect or unsupported or not completely accurate, or they just didn't have the information on these two surveys, whatever. We
Right.
all know that there's different language between whatever survey, and we all know the building was built in 72 to 75. So move on.
I will move on. So I speak today actually as your ally, the ally of the HDC, in support of your previous decision to preserve important Nantucket history and a critical historic district streetscape by denying the application to move a well-known and viewed barn off the street. I'm actually moved more by the words of the HDC than my own. So I thought I would incorporate that in some of my remarks today. The HDC wisely acknowledged, and I will quote from the decision, that the streetscape of this area of North Liberty Street has particular historical importance and has been described as iconic. Now, this reinforces that each property, each neighborhood, and streetscape is unique and merits individual consideration. No two are alike, no two applications are alike, no two homes are alike, no two neighborhoods are alike, no two streetscapes are alike. The barn, quoting the HDC again, has become an important part of the historical context and streetscape of this area. The design is sensitive to the architectural design of the 18th and 19th century and is reminiscent of the original structure that would have supported the dwelling on the same lot. The building is considered more from the HDC. Quote, the building is considered contributing for the National Historic Landmark status of Nantucket.
Barry, do you want to incorporate? We've already incorporated it. We all know what we said,
Okay.
and I wrote it.
Well, sometimes the nuance, the innuendo, the phrase is important. In terms of whether or not the HDC has jurisdiction over streetscapes, the HDC has ruled that it, quote, can deny the application to remove the structure if the streetscape would be disturbed by its removal. So it does have that chop. It does have those chops. The HDC foresaw a potential development and rejected it. Quote, and thank Linda for the excellent prose. With the removal of the ancillary structure, the barn, there would be a potential of a new structure being placed in that space that would, by necessity, be located closer to the street due to the wetlands restrictions. Such a positioning on the lot would potentially create an atypical wall of structures. In this area, a majority of the lots maintain a certain amount of open space around the structures, and unlike streets closer to the downtown area, structures are not lined up immediately proximate to the street. This forced structural hierarchy would irretrievably and negatively alter the streetscape. Not my words, the words of the HDC. And further, the HDC said the removal of the barn, and I quote again, would permanently and detrimentally alter an important streetscape in the old historic district, as well as the historic character of the neighborhood, for no apparent purpose. I agree with the HDC. I agree with the Historical Structural Advisory Board. I agree with the Nantucket Preservation Trust. I agree with 600 Nantucketers, voters, and visitors, and ask you to affirm your wise decision of November 13th, 2014. Thank you very much.
Anybody else would like to speak?
I just want to say something really quick.
You can't do it from back there. You have to come up here so I can pick you up and identify yourself.
I'm Margo Montgomery, and I live at 33 North Liberty Street.
Did you get?
Louder.
Oh, Terry's back there. Margo Montgomery, 33
Margo, would you like a mic?
North Liberty Street, for the record.
Come on.
I'm only going to
Don't
be a
shy.
second. I have just a couple of comments to make on repairing the existing building as far as the invasiveness into the conservation land. There are professionals that specialize in doing foundation work without really being invasive in the surrounding areas. The house directly across the street from the Seth Ray house was, that entire foundation was dug out and replaced by Bob Baker, and nothing was picked up, moved. He had a little conveyor belt that he had go down into the foundation area. And he
Beyond
had,
the scope of us.
oh, well, I'm just telling you that it's not impossible to do the foundation work. Anyway, he's not around anymore, but there are people that do it. And then my other comment was that it certainly wouldn't be arbitrary to not consider this structure with the Seth Ray house. It was built to be married with the Seth Ray house. It is the same architecture. It was built as an ancillary building to be used in conjunction, as the outbuilding for that home. And since being used as a warehouse for the antique shop. And I think one of the only other comments I have to make is I get, Jeff, you said it was a commercial building. I don't know that it's actually, in the record zoned as a commercial building or just a,
It's just dead storage.
No.
Just storage.
No,
It says
no.
warehouse.
If you
It does say warehouse.
if you read the true assessor sheet, it clearly shows
okay.
warehouse and commercial business
So they are taxing
store.
him that way,
That's
Okay.
correct.
somehow.
That's correct.
All right. So you're proposing to take the commercial out of the residential area.
That's correct. Of course.
And so as the antique shop is being used, existing, that is another commercial building.
That's correct.
So that is still going to currently run as what is considered a commercial space as well.
That's number 31. They're two different commercial spaces.
Right, okay.
Correct.
All right, I think that's all I really have to add. That's all.
Okay,
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public like to speak at this time? You have a quick rebuttal, and then the board's going to ask questions.
Yes, very quickly, responding.
Jonathan Fitch.
This is Jonathan Fitch again. There's been some, Sarah Alger mentioned that you should be currently considering what is going to happen to this site after the structure is removed. And respectfully, that's not proper. You are to be considering only whether or not this structure can be moved. You will have another opportunity, and I'm sure it'll be quite an ample opportunity, to pass upon what is going to be in its place. And the applicant is not required, and you shouldn't be thinking that the applicant is required to be presenting a proposal for this location at the same time that this removal is being considered. You will have ample time, and all of the speculation about what is going to be there and how horrendous it's going to be and so forth, I suggest that such speculation is really improper. Those opposing the applicant have not, they've pointed to some fairly trivial, irrelevant errors in the materials. What they have not presented is any single case where you have denied an application to move a structure in the historic district. Not a single case. And what we have presented you with is an abundance of evidence where you have permitted structures to be removed or demolished. This structure is not going to be demolished. It's going to exist. It's being moved to Bartlett's Road. And it is an extraordinary, extreme departure from the way you've treated these applications in the past. Those are the points that I just wanted to make in rebuttal. Thank you.
Can I clarify one point, Mr. Chairman?
You got about 10 seconds.
That's all I need. Just running up here so I'm in the right spot. Sarah Alger again. I just want to clarify, I did not say that the applicant was required to present what is going in the place of this structure, if anything, or that you should be reviewing that. What I did say, though, was in those cases that were shown on the screen, in most of those cases, you were provided, as part of the application, with a companion application that showed what was going to go in its place. That was something that the board requested. The applicant has the ability to either provide it or decide not to provide it, just in the same way that you have the ability to request it and then deny or allow the application. You certainly are well within your rights to request copies of plans showing what is proposed in place of this structure. Otherwise, you could be placed in a situation where you would have a missing tooth. And that, again, is something that would disrupt the streetscape and not be appropriate change in this neighborhood. Thank you.
Just to clarify that, most of the examples, if I recall, except for Mello's garage, but the house is still there. Most of those examples were not ancillary structures. They were primary buildings that were being moved out, so we asked to see the replacement primary building. This is one of the only times we've seen ancillary structures moving out of the old historic district, and we have not necessarily required anything in its place. In Mello's, we have not. But most of these things in here, if I recall them, there's so many of them, were actually the primary structure and not a garage or a shed or some other ancillary structure like a warehouse, whatever they want to call it. So just clarifying that. And that's why we did ask for what the replacement house was going to be like. Some had to duplicate fairly closely what had been there. We've got one other garage before us right now on Gardner Street, one of the Woods garages, where we are holding that up because he's putting a house there. But we don't usually see ancillary structures going out. So this is a very different animal from requiring the replacement house to avoid the missing tubes. We already have the two replacement, the houses are still there. This is a ancillary structure. So just be clear about that.
Well, thank you for reminding me about ancillary structures. It did remind me that Bill Little's property on Mill Street,
Yep.
there was an old garage there that was basically falling down and in terrible repair. He asked to either move or demolish it, and you denied that and required him to renovate the garage and repurpose it. I believe he repurposed it because it couldn't even be, it was an old garage. It was so old, the car wouldn't even fit in it and allow you to open the doors. So I believe he repurposed it as a, like a shed or garden structure.
But that's also was a 100-year-old some odd ancillary structure that went with a house next to it before they subdivided. So that was a little different also, because that was an
every
old
case
structure.
every case is different, and I guess that makes the point that every single case is different. Every case should be looked at on its own facts. I think you've already done that in this case and made a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do you have a question for,
I wondered,
before we start making comments, do we have any clarification questions?
the clarification comment that I wanted to make is I believe that the building on Union Street at Consu Springs, they requested it to be removed to another location, and it was never, we denied it from the very beginning, and
It
we held.
moved out to Comet Avenue.
No, the little barn that's sitting there as I go around the corner of Union Street to my house.
Land Bank?
Yes.
Guyard's house.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what I said. It is there, and it was denied. We have on occasion denied moving. It may not be recorded in your thing because we went on to do something else, but
Well, that was a house, and it went back to the barn, which is what it was in the old picture. So that went back to what it was.
right,
So that's,
but it
that wasn't
didn't
going
move.
anywhere.
It didn't go. It was not removed, so they could sell it to developers. If you remember the conversation that took place.
Well, Land Bank had it.
Right, that's what they wanted to do. If we didn't do it.
That again was a very specific, because it was a barn, it went to a house, got added onto, took all the additions off, went back to the barn. So that was that a particular pastoral set. But that was, it's not really relevant to this one. Okay, John?
Okay, thank you. A nice presentation from both sides. I believe the gentleman on my right here made a comment.
Attorney Fitch, John?
You bet.
Attorney Fitch.
Yes.
Attorney John.
Just for the tape.
Okay. He said something similar to all applications are contributing structures regardless of its style of architecture. I stand to be corrected, but if that's what I think I heard, I believe I heard that. So, but this is a situation where this is a true comment. Val Martino, Mr. Martino, the father, I knew him very well, and his mother, his wife. And when he built that house, I was here on the board. And
Built what?
when he built the house, I was on the board.
What house?
Not the house, excuse me, the barn, whatever you want to call it, the gamble structure.
Yeah. Okay.
And I firmly believe that he had thoughts in his mind to match the neighborhood. That's why he could have saved a lot of money by going to a gable instead of a gamble. But he decided to match what was there. So that brings in the thought that somebody visiting Nantucket sees the two of them, thinks they're cousins, you know, although it is a new type structure. So I think that was behind his thinking, and it does tie into the neighborhood. It is harmonious to the neighborhood. All right. The other one that mentioned was the 50-year comment. and it's over 50 years might be contributing or something. That was a comment that was made about 8 or 9 years ago by a member here, and it was carried on by him. A lot of people fell into it and thinking it, you know. Now, you go back to the original bill, 1955, which is still alive today, and it still says it. Shall make judgments of architectural features of structures of 1849 or before. And it has never been done because people want modernized stuff as time comes along. And a lot of stuff was built before 1955, and that's when you got your modernization coming. And you had very little, I'm going to say, style of single-story houses that were ranch style. Now, they started just after the war. They built down past the Inky Mirror, that whole subdivision in behind it. It's all started out all ranch styles. People later on come in to put in 2 stories there. They were denied. Said no, it's all 1 story. It's harmonious to itself. I think the board made a good decision. Yeah. What else do I have here? If anything, I think to the commission as well as the applicant, in the future, if anything is submitted to this board, I'd appreciate it. Myself, probably the board too, that when you submit a document, it's over 100 pages with pictures and everything, it's nice, very good presentation, but number them. We spent a lot of time here when you were saying the house so-and-so, we had to go find it. We couldn't tell us what page. That is very aggravating for this commission to eat their time up doing that, when we have more important things to do. I will stop right there at this moment. I might have more comments. Thank you.
Ray?
Okay. I've written a few things down here. First is, although I've been on the HDC now for less than a year, slightly less than a year, I've been presenting to the HDC for 25 years. So I do feel like I have experience talking about the issue that's on the table right now. And I would say that it would be counter to the HCC policy, not just the current board, but all of the boards that I've dealt with in the past 25 years to deny this move. Buildings that are old and new and in town and out of town have been approved for relocation either on site or off site during that entire time. And it's not just sort of insignificant places where this work has taken place. I personally recall moves like this taking place on Orange Street, Main Street, Pleasant Street, my own street, which is Pine Street in town, all which I would term historic and iconic streetscapes. So there is ample precedent. I don't think what they had on the board nearly covers. If you were to go back decades, you'd find a lot more than what you presented. And I think that the rationale that is being pushed for the opposition, which are people that are opposing this move, that because something's fine the way it is, that's the end of it, that it stops there. I can't subscribe to that logic because it would really handicap people from doing things, particularly those people that happen to have an attractive building. By the way, just as a sidebar, the reason I asked about what elevation we were looking at on that warehouse building, the north elevation, if that were before the board today, we would not approve it. There are all sorts of things wrong. There wasn't the 3-foot setback, and there was a flush 2 stories and all that kind of stuff. So the side that faces the street, I think everyone would agree, is a very pleasant building. But I think the logic that because it's pleasant, that's the end, nothing else can happen. Really, if we're buying into that logic, that's going to mean problems for the town in general. It's going to mean a lot less work for we members of the HDC. So I don't think. Also, I want to talk about the idea of that's been passed around about seeing the alternative. And I think in a lot of cases, having sat on this board, I'm very interested in seeing what the alternative is. In this case, I'm not. Reason being, if the building gets removed and nothing ever goes there again, I don't see how that would be creating a gap tooth any more than the Lily Pond Reservation is a gap tooth, or the wetland on the other side of the street by Woodbury Lane is a gap tooth. We all accept that those spaces in the fabric are there, and you grow accustomed to it. Having said that, so I accept the gap tooth, if you want to call it a gap tooth. I also accept that there is a potential to be able to design a building that is completely within the HDC guidelines. That would be an infill building there that would be pleasant and attractive and match the streetscape in the same way that this Gambrell building does. So I'm still where I was the last time this went around. The other thing I just want to add is there was some talk about all the structural issues with the building. I appreciate that. I don't think it's germane to this. I think if this thing were sitting on a perfectly solid foundation and the ridge were perfectly level across, it wouldn't change my opinion. That's it.
Oh, that's interesting, because I went to see the building about 2 weeks ago, and I was looking at the cracks and how it was sort of settling into the lily pond, and how my original thought was I wished that it could move forward, the whole structure, because it has to be off that setback. I think it's, I can't remember what the setback is. Is it 50 feet?
Theoretically.
That's a
So,
Concom.
That's a Concom.
right, so I actually am in favor of the move, because I also feel confident that the HDC will put it a building that is appropriate for the space, and I think it could be moved to Bartlett. In the future, I know it's not the policy, but to see what is going in its place would help me a lot. It would help me decide if something was to be moved or demolished. And I think it's a shame it's not part of the HDC policy.
Okay, so you agree, so I don't have to repeat anything, you agree with what Ray has said?
Yes.
Okay. I'm getting writer's cramp.
Your hand's been going nonstop for 2 hours.
Hey, okay, Diane.
I have been to see the building. I have seen the cracks and the bad foundation, the closeness it is to the lily pond.
Have you been inside it?
I've been inside it. Basically, I do not like to see buildings moved. I think the list that has been presented to us today of the number that 26 buildings have been moved since 2012, February 2012. Some of them had to be done, some of them were done for different reasons. They weren't just demoed or moved for the hell of it. 90% of them had a reason to have it happen to them. Doesn't mean that I like it any better. I voted against this the first time because I think that it does have continuity in the streetscape. Having seen where it sits next to the lily pond and the rear end sort of slipping off the land, that concerns me. It concerns me for the lip of the land going down to the lily pond, which I think is important, because once you start to lose it, it's like the bluff in Sconset. It will start to crumble and crumble. And Martino's other building that he uses use as an antique shop is not that far away from the Lily Pond. So you have to consider that. I would, as a last resort, I have to be honest, I would, as a last resort, agree to have it moved. If there's anything else that you choose to do with it, like bringing it forward so it is not lost to the streetscape, could be reconfigured into another building, bring it out of the buffer zone, the 25-foot buffer zone. Do you have to go beyond the 50, or is the 50 too close to North Liberty?
It's right on the cost.
So, I know that's what you're working with, and that's what I would do. Structurally, I think you can correct what's structurally wrong with the even whatever. The floor can be done again when you pour a new foundation for it wherever. So, I don't know if that gives you much hint of anything, but that's my truth.
Thank you very much. I agree with Ray and Abby for a lot of other reasons that weren't necessarily stated at this point. I don't think moving that particular building forward on the lot is going to be architecturally appropriate. That's going to create a very large gambrel, actually competing with a gambrel, which is something I don't want to see, because this structure is, what, 28 feet tall?
Mm-hmm. Is it?
Yeah. It's tall. It's got a very high first floor.
Yeah. It's not quite that tall, but it's pretty tall.
So I didn't want that particular structure moving forward. The original structure, it was a gap tooth for 80-some odd years, which is almost half of the lifespan, or just short of half of the lifespan of the 1802 structure. So there was a large gap there. The original building, according to the photos, was sort of a lean-to, broken-back barn, an actual barn, that looked like it was closer to the street. That's been gone a long time. There are a lot of houses are not on this list. Two of the most glaringly recent ones, which were up on Main Street, the one at Gate and Circle, which we just allowed to be moved in order to subdivide, leaving a 2005 garage on the right-hand lot to itself. That old house has been sitting in its original position. We voted unanimously to allow it to move to the left, or at least the majority allowed it to move to the left. They are subdividing. Let's put it on the table. Craig's barn, and that was a barn, which had been converted back in the early 1900s, probably over time, into a house and had all kinds of things stuck on it, very similar profile, was allowed to be picked up and moved to the right in order to create...
That's the one down at the fork there?
No, that's in the middle of Main Street up there. Was allowed to pick up, move, and have the pieces removed, so it could subdivide. Nobody likes change. I hate change probably more than anybody at the table. My family's been here since 1929. And I've never liked change. I hate change even in my own neighborhood, which is only 30 years old. But it is part of Nantucket. And somebody handed this into, I have my own notes on it, 27 North Liberty, this sheet of paper, which apparently came from something to do with 17 Broad Street. And one of the notes was, leaving the building in its original location would pose a threat to the continued existence and integrity of the structure. We have that. An example would be a structure threatened by erosion, well, in this case it's threatened by underlying wetlands. And nobody really cared where they were building relative to Lily Pond back in the day. Because if you look at the houses that are lined up along Lily Street, a lot of them have additions, full walls, 3 walls of glass, decks facing Lily Pond. I mean, things have happened over time with this area, and given that a majority of the development has been in the last 100 years on that street, with a lot of it built in the last 60 to 70 years, the streetscape has changed over time, as a matter of course. Franklin Street didn't exist before the 50s or late 40s. Certainly that thing across the street, which is flooding everybody out at the moment, wasn't there at all until last year. The biggest gap tooth was created by the removal of the Grange building, which a lot of people in this room have never seen, don't remember it at all, but I certainly do as a kid.
Can you tell me where?
The Grange was down on the corner where there's the land bank owns it all now.
Down by Grove?
No, towards Townmore, around the corner from 27.
Where the parking lot.
Oh,
Parking
that's
lot-
where it was?
Parking lot left.
Right.
It was huge building.
I know, I've been in it. I trained my
You remember
dogs
the
in it
building?
for
Yeah.
ages.
We had
but-
those, we had EMT courses in there, we had
Right.
everything in there.
I
That's
just
the
couldn't
biggest
remember.
gap that was created. So we've already got a gap of 80 years where the original barn left. We don't know how old that original barn was. There's no documentation other than a side, an oblique view of it. We have the Grange, which existed for probably 40 or 50 years anyway. That created a huge gap there. So, and then 5 Liberty was pushed back, 15 feet? And then Ed Toole's building, the Victorian, which wasn't Victorian when it was built, my grandparents actually rented one of these things back in the 30s, was pushed forward at least 15 feet.
At least.
At least. Erna Blair's building, yes, it was moved over to where it was on the other side. It was actually had an elevated first floor. It was then moved over to the other side of the street, down grade level, and then pushed up the street one lot so they could create the parking lot. Everything was moved around. So, and then beyond these 2 structures, there wasn't a heck of a lot going on. Because you get up to Backman's Cottages, which were not old. The one across the street is a 1930-something structure. The one on the other corner, the blue clapboard, was built in the 80s. There was an old shack there. So these peripheral areas of town tend to have an ebb and flow to them. And for me to try to justify, again, which is very much where I was the last time, for me to try to justify a structure, Steve Cohen's arguments were very compelling, legally. To try to justify, okay, I'm going to take the dart and throw it at the dartboard in 1975 for my streetscape, and we can't possibly remove it. That we cannot support or sustain on this board. I agree with Ray in that respect as well. So I am not opposed to moving this 1975 structure out of the neighborhood. But the caveat being is that whatever replaced it cannot overpower the Seth Ray shop
Well, Linda, I think,
or the Seth Ray building. And it would have to fit in, and if it's not up to the street and it's actually set back, so the streetscape remains the same. The streetscape are the structures that are on the street, because the only shot of this structure you can get is if you're standing looking straight at it. You can't see it around the old Seth Ray shop to the right, the 1802 building, and when you're on, certainly you can't see it when you're on the other side of the Seth Ray house. You can only get at it looking straight at it. I think that was the reason he built it there. And it's way off the street. So to me, the streetscape is what am I going to see when I'm driving down, as I have my entire life on. I bike, walking down, driving, whatever, past that structure. Whatever's going to replace it is going to have to be not competing with either of those 2 structures.
well, as Mr. Fitch said earlier, that is another application that will be before us, and we as a group will
Have
be
a
able
stranglehold
to
on that application.
decide the appropriateness.
But this is an ancillary structure. I don't want to see a presentation from the applicant of another ancillary structure. Whatever they're going to bring in, we have complete control of. But because another mitigating factor, this is an ancillary structure from 1975, not a 1936 bungalow on New Lane where we needed to see what was going to replace it, to see if it was going to fit in with what had been there, relatively speaking. So I don't have an issue with removing it either. Now, it seems to me we have a 3 in favor of moving. And Diane, where are you at the moment? Oh, it's snowing. That's great. Just a minute, I'm talking to Diane.
if you have 3 people for it already, it does matters little as to how.
Well, I want to make sure your feelings are represented. But it seems like we're going to go back to the original in favor decision, and the other one is the opposition decision. I can't see a whole lot to change in either one of them. Maybe we beef up the in favor one again. But I didn't want to leave you out there if you were not comfortable voting in favor or opposed.
No, I will vote. I just, as I say, I think it's, for me, it's a very difficult decision to make. I understand the problem with the building and the people who live there have an opinion also, so that's.
Okay, thank you. John, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it says here, the history of the HGC approvals in the immediate neighborhood of 29 North Liberty Street. For years, since 1967, when I first came on here, I find that we've basically, without quoting any rules or regulations, always considered immediate surroundings between 300 to 400 feet as a structure. That's all you can see of any structure, is 300 or 400 feet. All the rest is hidden by other buildings. And I just feel that some of these photos a half-mile away, Union Street, whatever, they have nothing to do with the immediate surroundings, in my opinion. I'm not speaking for anybody else, just myself. And the other comment was, we talk about contributing and non-contributing structures. There are 39 photos submitted. 24 of these photos, well, most of them were built before 1955, but most of them were built after 1900 also. So I'm saying some of this is not true, I'll say it that way, some of the comments of the way this is put together. Right? I'm saying there's some mistakes in there that I know from my knowledge only. So, thank you.
Okay, where are we going?
I move to approve the request for relocation of this building.
Based on the in favor? I mean,
Yeah, we can use that as a document,
You know,
if you'd like.
put other comments from this in there?
It's going to,
12 Bartlett Road.
Oh, hold on, so we're not
That's
going there
another,
yet.
that's another.
That's another, that's after this. We're not talking about that at all. Not at all, right
That's
here.
where it's going.
Ray, you made a motion to approve based on the original in favor document, which I will beef up with the comments that we've all made today. Is that okay?
Yes, can I just say that I'm with Diane on this. It's been a really hard decision. I mean, I think it's been a hard decision for everybody. I'm developing a migraine, definitely.
I think you can probably turn the light back on.
Yeah, yes, I'm in favor of the move, but I just want, this has been really hard.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's been difficult for everybody because there's so much emotion on both sides of this, and there's so many reasons on both sides of this. All right, Ray made a motion based on the previous in favor draft and beefed up by some of the other comments made today. All those in favor of Ray's motion?
Aye.
Hold on. All those opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And I am in favor. Thank you very much, everybody, for expressing your opinions and thoughts. Okay.
It's been a long, my comment, it's been a long haul, but as far as I'm concerned, I've done my homework.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, wait, we're not going to, we have to, somebody make a motion about 12 Bartlett. We got to probably throw that out on the table.
Motion to move the building to,
Hold on, you got to take a look at where, you got to take a look at where it's going. We got 12 Bartlett, we got to throw it. We're going to hold, Katie, we're going to hold the filing of that until I give you the
Are you
agenda.
signing it?
Yeah, we're signing it, but we're going to hold the filing of it until the addendum goes with it.
We got to
file it.
vote on the move to Bartlett.
She's going to pass that out in a second.
Did you want
Oh, is this for the,
I think so.
I don't have a pen.
Yeah, here's the pen.
Diane, do you sign when you, are
Some do,
against?
some don't. I do.
John doesn't.
I'm the chairman.
I don't usually.
You don't.
I do, I'm the chairman. I have to just write a protocol to it.
I wanted to go down to- She doesn't have to do that.
All right, please, just hang on to that. Let's not go anywhere without it.
This is it right here, or this is it? Oh, this is it.
Representing the applicant on 12 Bartlett Road.
West Bay Development, Sue Ellen Delcourt,
Okay? Jeff.
Jeff.
Yes, Jeff Bishulik, sorry.
Take it, you don't need to rep on this one.
No, no.
I don't, thank you.
Take a seat.
All righty, where are we going with it? If for anybody who doesn't know this property, it's on the corner of 38, it's Perry's old property.
But it's one end, it's just before the two houses that are down at a different level.
Correct.
It's right here.
Just past it, just past it.
There's 30 acres.
Yeah, well, it depends which way you're going.
There's
Oh,
one
yeah,
on the
yeah, yeah,
corner.
yes, yes, yes,
They've
yes.
got an entrance here, they can't come in off the 30 acres,
Yes,
so it's
yes,
going
yes.
right up here on the road, but closer to,
It looks like the barn doors are going to face the back, away from
Bartlett Road.
What's on the back?
of this building? Oh, no.
What's on the back?
There's a couple of windows.
You have an elevation of it.
We
You'd
got
have
pictures
to
in
climb
there?
in the wetland to get it.
No, no,
Is it just two?
yeah.
We have interior pictures, don't we?
What we're gonna need is a picture of the back,
I don't have a picture of the back.
sort of a nod. What you need to do is go over Lily Street and take a picture. from
Can
the
you see
back
it?
of
Yeah.
You can just,
Is it, they're coming in off Bartlett Road to the little driveway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a common drive.
common drive, so they're coming into the back side of it, so the two windows actually face the street. Is there a gable window?
Yeah, I believe so. There's a
That would be-
window
Yes,
on the
yes,
second
yes,
floor,
yes,
yeah.
there
So
is.
three
There's
windows.
one, there's one gable
Down
window.
here.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, yes,
I
that's
think,
exactly.
yeah, that's exactly it. Two windows on the first floor, one centered on the second.
Correct.
Okay, John?
Hold it.
Ray?
I'm good with it. Any plan for screening from the bike path there?
No, not at
Sorry, what?
the moment.
Okay.
What's to the left of it?
To the left, you approved, oh, sorry, I don't know.
From which
It's not
way- from
our-
which
I'm
way?
standing in the street, what's over here? I know the road
No,
is over here.
there's some duplexes.
Those
there.
belong to Caroline Daniels.
Yes,
Right,
Caroline.
down.
Caroline Daniels, two big
Yes.
duplexes on the left that
Yeah,
are way down the pit.
duplexes next door.
But
Next
where
door
this
here.
property
Yes,
is,
Yeah,
yes.
to the left.
Okay.
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot of screening. The houses,
Oh, it's got no screen.
his house, the Perry's house, the two Perry houses right there are right on, open to the street,
Is
so.
there any way to move, how many feet from the bike path is it, Ray, the distance?
19 to the far side, so less than that, I would
Is
say.
there any way to move it a little bit further back,
Not really, because.
like even 10 feet?
No, and the reason being is that this is a special plan approved by the planning board, or excuse me, it was really the ZBA. The common driveway is the frontage lot for the big lot in the back right here.
Yeah.
The 19,000 square feet, and that was special relief granted to us
Yep.
by ZBA
Yep.
because Mr. Perry for years had thought that he had rights in
Rights in
30 acres
which he
lane,
doesn't.
of which he had a 4-lot project that never flew, so we had to come in with this revamped plan right here. So, yes,
Want to be recognized?
Sorry.
yes.
Michael Angelastro for the record.
Michael Angelastro, I am a alternate member of the ZBA and will not be sitting on this application when it comes in because I represent Mr. Schulich in real estate transactions. But the ZBA will insist on screening from the road of any project.
Oh.
For the barn,
Commercial
let's
use.
say barn at the moment.
Whatever structure is going to be there, if it's commercially, the ZBA is going to require screening.
So the onus falls off of us, Linda.
Well, no, it is us. because we need to require a screening plan as part of moving the barn ass end to the street.
We submit a separate landscape app.
So long as you put landscaping, what kind of landscaping do we want on the bike path, guys? Screening, what kind of screening?
Closest thing they got is privet
Not
along
big
there.
trees.
You want, you want year-round vegetation, is that where we're headed? Yeah. We can do that through staff.
Yes.
So just so I understand, that's not a separate landscape application? That is
Not the screening part, if you got a driveway, curb cut, you know, whatever. You're gonna have to pave over where the bike path comes. That's separate. But we can condition the approval of the ass end of the barn facing the bike path in the street based on you bringing a planting plan on there.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, does that work for everybody? Yes.
Why do we have to turn the barn that way? They can't turn the barn so.
They can't get to it because they're not allowed to come across the bike path.
Yeah,
Come in this way.
part of
They have to come up the
the, Diane,
driveway.
part of the deal with the zoning board was that we have only one curb cut, which is the common drive.
It's
So
gonna-
so we didn't have 3 curb cuts coming in off over the bike path.
How
They
come
don't want
they-
the parking in the front, so that's another.
Because he always had these 2 driveways. How come they?
When he did a real estate transfer with the owners of the 30 acres place, he didn't retain rights. Disappointingly,
He gave up the property without getting rights to.
he didn't have, he
38.
lost his rights.
Because it was all within the family.
Yeah.
But then it fell out of the family in the middle 90s, and that was
That
where
was
the
the end of
problem,
that.
that's where the problem came in.
Family didn't get along.
I have a question. You just mentioned, you said part of the deal with the Conservation Commission?
No, zoning board of appeals.
In other words, you made a deal.
No, it was their requirement, their condition.
He's got it.
So all right, let's go up this then. We've all had it today. It would be approved landscape with year-round vegetation, screening it from the bike path, shown on the plan, and a picture of the rear of the structure.
Yeah.
Put in the file, okay? All those in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous.
I'm opposed.
John's opposed?
I'll give the reason. I find that the style of the construction that's going there, there's nothing like it in the neighborhood.
There's nothing like
The only
anything else anywhere in the neighborhood of each other.
Right.
So it's 4 to 1 in favor.
That's right.
Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
3:34, we're adjourning.
Excuse me. Point of
Clear
order.
the path in the back again.
Point of something. Weren't we supposed to approve the agenda, the revised agenda for the meetings? Weren't we supposed to do that today?
Want to move to approve the agenda since there's 2 things on it? All those in
No,
favor?
not the agenda. I'm sorry, the
days
schedule
off.
of the meetings.
We did that.
When?
You left, remember? You didn't have to sit?
Oh,
did that.
okay. All right,
And when-
sorry.
But we are having a meeting the night of the of voting, right?
Yes.
We've always had a meeting.
That's the following week.
Yeah,
Just
but it
not
was
the
on
ni-
there.
Just
No,
not
no,
the
that's
second
town
night
meeting.
of town meeting.
Town meeting.
Because they're figuring the town meeting might run 2 nights, so we
The 7th is
nixed
town
that.
meeting,
They
Diane.
got it.
7th is town meeting, the 14th